Hey, thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of Front Porch Conversations here at Advent Christian Village. Today, my guests are Paul and Flora Cook. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Paul and Flora live in River Woods.
Yes.
And right down the street from me, so I'm very fortunate to have great neighbors, like most of you do here at the village.
In October, it'll be 19 years.
So you were here 6 years before I arrived. I know that we'd like to have our viewers know more about the two of you. So if you'll start, where did your life begin? And tell us a little bit about your early life for each of you, and then we'll move on.
Well, we're both originally from West Virginia, 5 miles away from each other. Didn't know anybody we didn't know each other until Paul got through college and started teaching. And then my brother-in-law was a friend of his, and Paul was home one year for the Christmas holidays and asked if I would go out with him. So that was the beginning of it. And
like a blind date.
Blind date.
And I'm from Kaiser, West Virginia, and it's about 5 miles downstream of the Potomac River from Piedmont, where Flora was from.
So both of those were small towns?
Oh,
both
yes.
of them, railroading towns and coal mining. And
up until recently, Piedmont, the major employer was a paper mill, but it has closed down with about 700 employees laid off. Yeah.
so my where I was born and raised is more or less a ghost town now. And we have no family back there anymore, so we do not go back that way. But Paul has no family there, and I had one sister left, and she is now a permanent resident of Florida, so we just stay down here.
And we lived in Maryland longer than we lived in West Virginia.
Well, let's back up just a minute. Tell me about your early childhood for each of you.
Mine, I guess, was rough. I had 3 older brothers and 2 younger sisters. And my father was blind, and our family was very poor, so we had to work, and I did babysitting and running errands and helping to clean people's houses. But the schools were right in Piedmont at the time, and we had an elementary school from 1 through 6. There was no such thing as kindergarten, and then from 7 through 12 was the high school. And after I graduated, our high school principal was the uncle of the representative from the 2nd District of West Virginia, and he chose me to work for them in Washington while I attended Strayer's Business College. And then after Strayer's, I went into the FBI, and I worked there for several years, and then I realized the city was not for me, so I went back to West Virginia, and I worked for an electrical company out of Pomona, California, that had a factory there in Kaiser, and I worked there for almost 10 years. And then I met Paul, and it changed the whole thing.
Paul, tell us about your early childhood.
Well, my early childhood was playing ball in the neighborhood, baseball, basketball, hunting in the fall. In fact, back in those early days of the early 1950s, I could walk with my shotgun through the small town of Kaiser and go up into the mountains squirrel hunting. And I wouldn't dare walk in a town now with a shotgun exposed. And just typical childhood activities. became a newspaper boy for the Cumberland Times News, which is out of Cumberland, Maryland. And that paper, including the Sunday edition, was 46 cents. And every 2 weeks, I collected 92 cents. And I only had one person rip me off. And just like I deliver the Friendly Neighbor News, I, at that time, used to buy soap. And memories include walking down Main Street on an early Sunday morning, delivering the paper, and I was the only footsteps going through the snow. And then when I finished high school, well, during high school, I played basketball and baseball. And then after I graduated from high school, I went to Potomac State College, which was a junior college at West Virginia University. And I went there for $45 a semester. And that $45 a semester wasn't per credit hour. It was a maximum of 15 hours of college credit for $45. And
Did you have a basketball scholarship?
No.
It was just $45.
And I walked several blocks every day to college for the first 2 years. Had no desire for a car. And my parents really didn't have a lot of money. My mother was a registered nurse. And when she graduated from nursing school, she worked at a tuberculosis sanitarium. This is 1930s, for $1 a day. And my dad, when times were rough in those early years, he worked for a merry-go-round company. And then he got a job at the Celanese, which was near Cumberland, Maryland, where they made synthetic fiber, like for parachutes during World War II. And then after 2 years of college at Potomac State, I then transferred to Shepherd College in Shepherdstown, West Virginia, which is near Martinsburg and Harpers Ferry in the Eastern Panhandle. And I graduated from college in mid-year and borrowed a car and went to Frederick, Maryland and interviewed for a job. And on the way to Frederick, Maryland, I stopped in a town called Boothboro, and I needed gas, and I told the attendant, and this is at a time when the attendants pumped the gas, and I said, I only want $5 worth of gas, and he filled it up, and I said, I don't have any more money, and so I continued on, interviewed for the job, and was called and took my first teaching position on February the 4th, 1960. And I stayed at that school for 30 years. And the first school had been built, I think like 1932, and was like an old castle. And my second floor classroom had the plaster dropping off onto my desk that I cleaned off every morning before school started. And then thanking the Russians, they put up a satellite called Sputnik. And that prodded our politicians to realize that we needed to upgrade our science education. So they started the National Science Foundation. And during my first 2 years of teaching, I continued going to school, getting graduate credit. And then I applied for a National Science Foundation scholarship and was accepted along with 29 other teachers, science teachers from around the nation. And it was to Morgantown, West Virginia University. So Flora and I spent a year in Morgantown, and I got my master's degree, and then I continued doing graduate work, and I got 30 hours beyond my master's, and that put me at the top of the pay scale after 2 years of teaching. And there wasn't any monetary incentive to go in for a doctorate degree. And I would have had to pay for that myself. And so then, when I returned from Morgantown after a year, they had been building a new high school. So I moved into a new high school that was high tech. And Frederick, Maryland didn't hold back on equipping it with all kinds of scientific equipment, including a greenhouse on the roof. And I became a fixture there then for 30 years. And since I started in teaching in midterm, I completed my tenure of 30 years in January of 1990. And then the town of Brunswick, Maryland, which is about 7 miles downstream from Harper's Ferry, they couldn't get any of the employees to pass the Maryland certification test. Well, being in school my entire life, from 6 years old up until 52 years, I was in school all that time. 46 years of school. And then the city of Brunswick was the superintendent of water and wastewater treatment plants was one of my former students, and he was the boss. And he asked me if I would come and be the lab technician, study for the test, and then have the fellows that couldn't pass the test work under me. So I studied for the Maryland certification degree and passed it. And the other employees that couldn't pass it were my former students. And they couldn't get away from calling me Mr. Cook. But I stayed there 10 years until 2000. From 1990 to 2000, I was an employee as a lab technician, and that was good because anytime I wanted to take off and take a trip, oh, that's okay. Go ahead, Mr. Cook. You can go. So Flora wouldn't fly. So my friend and I traveled to Costa Rica and Alaska and Ireland and Normandy and Mexico and thereabouts. And so then in 2000, our parents at that time had died. We had one daughter. The older daughter moved to Monticello because she married into the Air Force, and her new husband's duty station was Moody Air Force Base. So she moved south. And then a little bit later, our second daughter was transferred to Jacksonville. And so there we had two daughters, one in Jacksonville, one in Monticello, and no reason to stay up north. We were only 50 miles from Baltimore and Washington, and the beautiful dairy farmland was being turned into housing developments, and it was becoming a Jacksonville with traffic. And all of my, and when I was in school teaching, I'd come home in the evening and my beagle would be waiting, looking out the picture window, awaiting my arrival, and I'd go in, change my clothes, pick up the shotgun, step out the back door and go into the woods with my beagle, rabbit hunting. And of course by 1990, all that had changed with housing developments, and you couldn't do anything like that.
Flora, who cleaned the squirrels? Who cleaned and cooked the squirrels?
Both of us cleaned them. And I tell you, it wasn't a pleasant with me. The very first squirrels he got, I did not, because my family did nothing like any kind of squirrel hunting. Paul's family was very familiar with it. They did it all the time because he always went out with these uncles. And I can remember putting when he would skin them, I would put my fingers down in and turn my head. The very first squirrel hunting he went after we were married, thought it was okay. Nobody told me how to take them or anything. And we came in one time and there was the most horrible odor in our house. You couldn't believe it. Nobody told me that I had to soak them in the refrigerator. And I had left them out all day and a warm day, and so we had to get rid of the squirrels. We didn't eat them. But I cooked them, and I cooked the rabbits. But we would not want to eat any of the squirrels down here. And,
they're scrawny.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, Flora, what were you doing during the time Paul was teaching? I bet you were raising two daughters.
Well, when we first moved to Middletown after we were married, I worked in the office of a furniture store. And then when he went to Morgantown for his scholarship, I was not allowed to work. That was one of the stipulations of the scholarship, that your spouse couldn't work. But I did volunteer work. I worked in the elementary school there, and then when we came back from Morgantown, we started raising our family. And then from then on, I did not get a paying job, but I was volunteer. I volunteered in the schools. I was a brownie leader for I don't know how many years, and so I did all volunteer work at that time.
And we had a big garden, and she did the canning.
Did all the canning and freezing and everything. So we had 4 acres. We had a very large garden, and so there was just a lot of work to do. And but I was very active in the schools with our children and all, the 2 girls. So, and now in the church, of course. And Middletown was a very small community, and but it has now grown up. So all the farms have been sold, and it's all housing developments.
But where we lived, there was a lot of history. We were not too far from Antietam, Sharpsburg, Harpers Ferry, Gettysburg, and whenever we had friends or relatives, we always had a place to take them. And
we were very close to Camp David, and we'd sit out on our porch. We knew when the president was going up because we were right in the flight pattern. And during the day, you would see the helicopters going over, and So we always knew when he was going up there, and it was very interesting. And but Paul did a lot of fishing, and we went with him. And
we weren't too far from West Virginia, and there were a lot of nice trout streams around Charlestown, West Virginia. So I would go over there and rainbow trout fish. And one time we took the family, and I just happened to take my fishing pole with me. And we had a Beagle, and we took the Beagle along with us, and we ended up on a trout stream and got into ticks. And one time I recall, it was on a Sunday, and I think I was taking Flora to Mother's Day dinner, and it just happened to have a fishing pole in the car. And after that, we went fishing.
So you didn't have to cook that meal, right?
no.
So you cooked a lot of fish through the years, too.
But those rainbow trout, fried with fried potatoes, peppers, yeah, they were good. Yeah.
Well, Paul, I know you have a lot of interest in history, and you've traveled a lot in search of more history. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
That's part of what you like about traveling?
Yeah, one of my most memorable trips now was going to Normandy, and my brother-in-law, when he lived in West Virginia, he had a timeshare near Orlando, and then when he retired and moved to Leesburg, he was only 25 or 30 miles from his timeshare, so he used it on an exchange. So my son-in-law, married to Ellen, our older daughter, who he was in the Air Force, he became an IT technician for a company in Valdosta spelled S-A-F-T, SAF, and they make rechargeable batteries, and it was owned by a French outfit. So a couple times a year he would have to go to Paris to be updated on the latest software. And then he'd come back to this country and travel to all over the United States where the factories were, including one in Mexico, and train for the latest software. So anyway, the three of us thought it would be nice to go to Normandy. So my brother-in-law got an exchange at a timeshare just south of Rouen, where Joan of Arc was burned, along the Seine, and that was our hub. And every day we would branch out, head over west to Normandy, to the beaches. And on our first day, we flew in on the cat-eye, the overnight trip out of Atlanta, nonstop to Charles de Gaulle Airport, and my son-in-law had made arrangements for us to stay in the motel at the airport. Well, we arrived in Paris about 10 o'clock in the morning. We dropped off our luggage, got on the subway, and went into Paris and spent the day. And then near dusk, we got back on the subway, came back to the motel at Charles de Gaulle Airport, and next morning we rented a car and went over to our timeshare in the Normandy area, and each day we would branch out from there.
Sounds like a wonderful trip.
It was.
I know that both of you have been very involved in volunteering at the village, and I thank Paul for all the years he helped me decorate Christmas trees. because Paul was if you had a Christmas tree, Paul could probably reach it without much help.
Yeah.
So Paul, I thank you for that. But Flora, you volunteered as well. In fact, we changed the time of the interview today so you could finish your volunteer at Good Samaritan.
Yes, I think I've done just about everything. I've had to slow down quite a bit. Right now, I'm just at the Good Samaritan and the clinic. Excuse me. And I'm at the church. And but I've done F&Ns, and I was at Copeland Center for 18 years doing the mail and other things up there. And so we volunteered ever since we've come here.
Well, it sounds like you volunteered all your life somewhere.
Yeah, so always volunteering, but have enjoyed it. I enjoy meeting the people, and it's each job that you do, you meet a different group of people, and it's very, very interesting to find out where they're from and how they got down here.
Well, and so often in conversation you find something you have in common with them, or that you've lived in the same place. Or what advice would you give a young person today?
That's hard because with Paul and I, when we were raising our children, we were fairly strict, but now we find that the young people, now that's not everybody, not all young people. It just seems like they feel everything should be handed to them and not have to work for it. And we had to work for everything we had, and we sort of made our children, they come in and say, hey, we want a new bike. We didn't go out and buy them a new bike. They had to do things, to earn it or work towards it. My advice would be to get a good education and take some advice from the older people, because we've lived through a lot. And they haven't. I mean, we have 4 granddaughters, and we would talk about our days. A washboard? What in the world is a washboard? A wringer washer? What's that? And you give them if you have somebody that has an old-fashioned telephone, they don't know how to use it. And for heaven's sakes, put those clickers down once in a while. When you go into any place you go, that's...
Paul, do you have another piece of advice?
I would say one thing they should do is save money. Yeah. And, appreciate $1, and be respectful and mannerly. And be concerned about their fellow man.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you for our viewers today. We hope you'll tune in again to watch another Front Porch Conversation.